So the rest of you will come back and ask you some more questions on that topic here shortly. I'll move on to the next subject then. In this case, with the subject matter of the case, which, as I mentioned, the charges previously, when I read those, they involve charges of murder, conspiracy, and theft. Would the nature of those charges make it impossible or difficult for any of you to fairly and objectively evaluate the evidence in this case and render a fair and impartial verdict? Okay, no one responded to that question. I'll next ask some questions that should be obvious from reading your questionnaires, but I still need to ask these all on the record. Relating to any acquaintance with the defendant, are there any jurors here who are related in some way by blood or marriage to the defendant, or do you know her from any kind of business or social relationship? All right, no one answered affirmatively there. Does anyone here have any kind of a relationship of guardian and ward, master and servant, employer and employee, creditor and debtor, landlord and tenant, boarder or lodger between you and any of the attorneys here? Okay, no affirmative response. Are any of you a party in any civil litigation against the defendant? No response there. Have any of you ever brought a criminal complaint against the defendant, or have you ever been accused by any of the prosecutors handling this case of having committed a crime? All right. No response to that question. I'll next ask if you have any kind of relationship with the attorneys or potentially their firms. So for that part of the questioning, I'll have the prosecution first indicate who it is they work with in their offices, and again, introduce yourselves, and then I'll ask the defense so that we have those relationships established on the record. Why don't we start with you, Ms. Blake, if you'll explain who you work with in your office.
Thank you, Your Honor. So as the judge already introduced me, I'm Lindsay Blake. I have several attorneys that work in my office with me. They are Tanya Rawlings, Rocky Wixom, and Blake Hall. The judge also has already introduced Rob Wood. Within his office are Mackenzie Cole, Spencer Rammel, Troy Evans, and Adam Garvin. And then the judge has already introduced Rachel Smith as well.
All right. Mr. Wood, why don't we follow up with you? Or did she already go through your office? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to indicate that.
I'm a sole practitioner, just me.
All right. Mr. Thomas, who works in your office?
So I have Jordan Crane, Jason Gustavus, Timothy French, Alex Sosa, Tyler Salveson, Brad Rigby, Paul Butikofer, and Justin Bowles.
All right. With those names in mind, then I'll ask of the jurors, are any of you related by blood or marriage to any of the lawyers that were just mentioned, or do any of you know any of the lawyers from any professional, business, or social relationship? All right. No one answered affirmatively there. I'll next ask about whether or not you have any prior jury experience. If you have previously served on a jury in a case that went to trial, would you please raise your red card? Okay, we have several. Let's start on the front row there, juror 756. If you could just give a little more information about that. When did you sit on that jury, and do you recall if it was a civil or criminal case?
It was 1983, and it was a civil case.
And where was that?
It was in Woodland, California.
Okay. Was there anything about your experience sitting as a juror in that case that you think would impact your ability to be impartial in this case?
No.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Let's move back to the second row then of those that raised their card. Who was next? All right, sir, if you'd raise that card again one more time. Thank you.
929.
All right, juror 929. When did you serve on a jury, and what kind of case is it, if you recall?
Yes, I served on one here in Ada County 3 years ago, criminal case, and then one almost 30 years ago in Malheur County, Oregon.
All right, did both of those cases go through and reach a verdict, do you
They
recall?
did.
All right. As you look back on both of those times you served as a juror, was there anything about that experience that you think would affect your ability to sit as an impartial juror in this case?
No.
Okay, thank you for your response. Let's talk to the next juror that raised their card, 1013. If you could state when it was and what type of case.
It was, I believe, 2015, somewhere around there. It was a criminal case.
And was that here?
No, it was in Santa Cruz County, California.
All right. Did you sit on a jury that reached a verdict in that case?
I did.
Was there anything about your experience in that jury service that you think would impact your ability to be an impartial juror in this case now?
No.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I think we had one more, or was that everyone? Juror number 1051. Would you explain when and where that case was and what type?
I believe it was here in Ada County, I think 2019. I'm not certain on the year. It was, I believe, a civil. It was resisting arrest.
All right, and was a verdict reached in that
Yes.
case? Was there anything about your experience in sitting on that jury that you think would impact your ability to be impartial in this case?
No.
Okay, thank you for your response. I'll next ask a more general question about this case. Have any of you ever formed or expressed an unqualified opinion that the defendant in this case, Mrs. Vallow Daybell, is guilty or not guilty of the offenses charged? Okay, no one answered affirmatively. Do any of you have any bias or prejudice either for or against the defendant, Mrs. Vallow Daybell, in this case? All right, there was no response there. The court, in your questionnaire, provided you with a large list of names of witnesses that may testify at this case. Are your answers there still accurate as to whether or not you know any of the witnesses? Okay. Are there any of you who are unwilling to follow my instructions to you, the jury, as to the law and how you must apply the law in determining this case? There was no affirmative answer there. Do any of you have a religious or moral position that would make it impossible for you to sit in judgment of another or to render a fair and impartial verdict in this case? All right, there was no affirmative response there. Are any of you, if selected as a juror in this case, unwilling or unable to render a fair and impartial verdict based upon the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law as instructed by the court? All right, there was no affirmative answer to that either. And then finally, do any of you have any other reason why you believe you cannot give this case your undivided attention and render a fair and impartial verdict if you end up serving on the jury? All right, there were no responses to that either. At this time then, the court will pass the matter for Attorney Vordaer, starting with the state. Who's going to be conducting Vordaer today? Ms. Blake?
I will be, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Blake, you can commence with the state's Vordaer at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience today. Obviously, as we start jury selection, we want to make sure that we get jurors on here that are willing and able to serve and that are willing to follow the court's instructions. So I am going to follow up on a few things and give a little bit of explanation. It may be a little confusing to hear that we have both Madison and Fremont County here, but as the judge said as he read the indictment, the crimes in this matter are alleged to have occurred in both Madison and Fremont County, As you've heard, we're both fairly small offices, and so we've joined together in bringing this prosecution. So in case there's been any confusion there, just kind of a little explanation with that. The judge already touched on this, but I just briefly want to remind everyone, if anyone is uncomfortable answering a question in this setting, or if anyone has any information that they feel the court or attorney should know about your ability or inability to serve as a juror, please do not hesitate to let us know. Raise your hand, or if we call on you, I'd rather speak about that privately. We want to make sure that if there is any information that you feel comfortable giving that to us and that you don't hold that back. And again, part of why we're looking at that is we'll use the term brutal honesty. And I'm not trying to trick anyone here, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone. But when I use the term brutal honesty, I'm going to ask a couple people. Juror 1013, I'm going to pick on you because I know that you have served on a jury before. So I want to ask you, in your mind, or if you hear the term brutal honesty, what does that mean to you?
To me, that means the truth unvarnished by attempts to soften or be kind and gentle, just to tell the truth the way it really is.
Okay. And I'm also going to ask juror 755. And same question, when you hear the term brutal honesty, what comes to mind, or what does that mean to you?
The term the truth hurts. Whether it's nice or not, it's still the truth.
So, and I think there was some consistency in those answers that it may include hurting someone's feelings or saying something that isn't popular. And when you're serving on the jury and as you hear things, you're asked if you can consult with other jurors, but there also may be times that you have disagreements or that your opinions or how you viewed something don't match up. So we need everybody here comfortable. Could everybody be brutally honest with each other and themselves as they sit on this case? Is there anyone that has concerns about their inability to do that? So then I'm going to give you a little bit of an example here. If you got on a plane tomorrow and the pilot said, instead of, hey, we're going to arrive at our destination around this time, lay back, enjoy your flight, or sit back and enjoy your flight. If instead he said, hey, or he or she said, I'm going to try to land this plane, and, we'll probably get there at this time, and then I'm going to try to land the plane. How many of us would want to stay on that plane? Would anyone, by a show of hands, actually stay on that plane? We have a couple that say they would stay on the plane. So I'm going to go to them. I think 1051, you raised your hand that you'd stay on the plane.
Unfortunately, the reason I raised my hand is because I've been in that exact scenario before.
You had a pilot that told you they might be able to land the plane. Can you explain a little bit? Was it weather related?
It was a very remote village in Africa where they were trying to land the plane, and the airfield was a little tore up. So it was, hopefully we're going to land smoothly, and there won't be a crash landing.
So they hoped they'd land smoothly. If they'd said, it's 50-50, I might crash the plane, would you have felt a little less comfortable?
Probably.
Okay. I think we had some other hands on that too. 776, I think you had your card up. And what was your experience?
Similar to his, I was in a remote area on a hunting trip, and it was kind of predetermined prior to takeoff. It's either go for it or don't, and it's part of that adventure, kind of going to the honesty thing. You're either in or you're not.
Okay. So with yours, was it a little bit more, it was a 50-50? Or did they tell you pretty good odds?
It was less than 50-50. Mine was multiple factors, but it was sacrificing the purpose and everything I was there for ahead of time and never having it come as an option. Or it was go for it, which turned out to be smooth, easy, and one of the best things.
Okay. And 1013, I think you were the other card there. Have you been in that situation, or you just risk it and stay on the plane?
I haven't, but I've got a cousin who is a licensed airline pilot, and he did bush flights in Alaska, just delivering necessary vital supplies to outlying rural areas. And if I've gone through security and gotten on the plane, I'm going to trust that the airlines put somebody in charge of the plane who knows his job. And I'd rather have him tell me the truth than lie to me.
And that's perfect because that leads into my follow-up. If you had the option, though, if you were in that same scenario and there's two pilots and one says, I can land this plane, and one says, I think I can land this plane, which plane are you getting on? Would we all agree we'd get on the plane with the pilot that says, I can land this plane? Would we all feel more comfortable on that flight? I didn't actually expect some people to have been in that scenario, so that's interesting. But I think we can all agree that our preference would be someone that says, I can land this plane. And when you're serving on a jury, obviously the stakes, there are multiple parties involved. We've got the defendant, Ms. Vallow Daybell, we've got the state, and we've got some victims. And for all of them, we want to make sure that the jurors can feel that they can land that plane. And you'll hear more about this, but what I'm talking about with that is the court is going to give you some instructions. And the court will ask, can you follow the instructions as given? And it's important that we get people that feel that they can follow those instructions. Because similar to that situation, if it's one of the two, we want to make sure that we have someone that can land the plane. We want to make sure we have jurors that are saying, I can follow the court's instructions. Because there may be times that you think, I don't really agree with this. I think the law should be this. I think maybe the instruction should say this. But that's not going to be what's up for debate with this case. We're going to need people that can say, even if I think the law should be this or an instruction should read this way, we need people that can commit and say, I will follow what the court tells me. Is there anyone here that has concerns with being able to say, if the court instructs it, even if I disagree, I'm going to follow the instruction given by the court? Anyone have concerns with that? You've also been told a little bit, and again, I'm not going to get too far into this, as the court has already indicated with regard to publicity. We'll take that up separately. But I do just briefly want to touch on it. Obviously, there are individuals that have already indicated on the jury that they have seen something about this case. Either news, internet, some kind of media source. Is there anybody here that would say, if I read it on the internet, if the news reported it, it must be true? Anybody think that? And I'm going to pick on juror 876. You indicated no, that you don't believe everything's true. Why do you not believe everything's true, just if it's in the news or on the media?
I feel like each individual news group has their own bias. So, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. And 894, same question.
I was in Ethiopia, and I watched the war on Gaza from two different news stations. One was Al Jazeera, and one was the BBC, and it was like watching two different wars. Nothing was the same, and so it just shows how the media can skew to the bent that they would like it to be.
Okay. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone participating in this. I know it's not always comfortable, so I do appreciate everyone's willingness to answer these questions. The other thing with this case is, as you probably have heard and remember from the reading of the indictment, this is a case that is dealing with the murder of 2 children and a mother of 5. And at times you may be shown some evidence that may not be the easiest to look at, may not be something you're really comfortable with. Does anyone have concerns about viewing that type of evidence or those type of materials? We have a card back there. 1051. Can you tell me a little bit about what your concerns might be?
I have 3 small children, so just autopsy photos wouldn't be the most desirable thing. But
And when you say they wouldn't be the most desirable thing, do you think that your reaction to them would be such that it would overcome your common sense and reason?
I honestly don't know one way or the other.
Would you be willing to, even if they were upsetting to you or disturbing, because that's expected that it may be that way, do you believe that you could still sit back, view all the evidence presented, not just that one piece, and and be fair and impartial and give all the evidence the weight that you feel that it deserves.
Yes.
And I'll ask Juror 745. I believe, if I remember correctly, you have some children.
Yes, I have 3 children, and it would be hard for me to see graphic pictures. I would do my best to get through that portion of it.
And I would ask you the same question. Do you think that you would have such a reaction to those that it would overcome your common sense and reason?
I don't think so.
And do you think that you would be willing to still sit back and review all the evidence presented, not just that one piece of evidence or the evidence that may be upsetting to you? Would you be willing to review all of that evidence and give it the weight you feel it deserves?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing that, and I've touched on this, but all parties deserve a fair and impartial trial in this case, and that is the defendant, Ms. Vallow Daybell, and that is also the state. Does anyone have any concerns about your ability to sit as a fair and impartial juror and review the evidence as presented, given the nature of the charges? I don't have anything further at this time. I'm going to turn it to Ms. Smith with the state.
Good afternoon. I'm going to turn to a couple of quick concepts. The judge has already read the instruction. He gives us the law in this situation, so I'm certainly not going to attempt to even repeat that. But I do want to talk about a couple of concepts, and I want to talk about it specifically with regard to some of your responses on your questionnaire. Okay? So Juror 745. And again, if I ask a question that's too personal or you want to talk about it outside the presence of everyone else, I know the judge will let us do that in a bit. But yes, Juror 745. I read in your questionnaire that you had a relative who was attacked in their home.
Yes.
Okay. And I think we understood sort of the circumstances of that from the questionnaire, and I'm not going to get into the details. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about that, having had a close family member who's a victim of crime. Right. And you've heard the court's instruction on the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about the situation, having had a family member who was recently attacked and who's now deceased in the last couple of years, is there anything about that situation that's going to make you sort of feel sympathy for the state such that you will not hold the state to its burden of proof?
No, I think it was a very different situation than the current situation here.
Okay. You understand, and I'm going to ask the other jurors to listen to other people's answers. You understand that the state, and only the state of Idaho, and specifically the prosecutors here, have the burden to prove the charges involved?
Yes.
Okay. And you understand that the court, Judge Boyce, is going to give you definitions inside. They're called instructions because lawyers like to use big words when practical words of definition might suffice. But definitions of that crime will be given to the jurors.
Yes.
Okay. And that those definitions will have parts. You know, some people analogize it to a recipe. And that recipe will have specific parts as defined by the legislature and the courts.
Yes.
Okay. And in that recipe may be different than what you think it should be. And I often will say the recipe, say for chocolate chip cookies is, you know, chocolate, sugar, flour, and butter. And then everybody steps back and like, that's kind of a gross recipe. But that's the definition you're given. And so is there anything about your personal situation that would cause you to kind of change that definition and follow what you thought the law should be?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Is there anybody, having heard that conversation about juror number 745's personal situation and sort of her responses. So anybody who is reflecting on their own personal situation is concerned about holding the state to its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay. Did everyone understand what I was talking about? Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Juror 755. Okay. Yes, sir. I see that one of the witnesses, Garth Warren.
I don't personally know him, but through my relationship through work, I work with his office.
Okay. And the minute that word came out of my mouth, I remember you had qualified that on your questionnaire, but that's exactly that complete, honest answer we're looking for. So thank you for fixing that for me. Now, the fact that you've heard of him or heard about him, okay, is there anything about that that's going to affect your ability to judge his credibility like anyone else?
There's not.
Okay. And do you understand that when you are judging the credibility of witnesses, you have to judge the evidence based on only what you hear in the courtroom?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And in that situation, is there anything about your knowledge of him that's going to cause you to take that step back and make it easier on the state than the definition the court gives you? Okay. And you understand that the state, and only the state, has a burden of proving anything in this case?
I do.
Okay. And your knowledge of Dr. Warren, and I believe he's chief medical examiner here, is your knowledge, nothing about that's going to cause you to cause it so that you put any sort of burden on Ms. Vallow Daybell? Okay. Do you feel you have insight into him?
No, I don't.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, I'm going to ask all along, no, I'm moving on, but I am. Everybody else that we've talked to, do you understand that you have to judge the credibility of the witnesses that are brought before you? Yes. Okay. And the vast majority of you have heard something about it, and we're going to talk about it separately. But no one can come into this case believing or evaluating the credibility of witnesses with any material that they bring from the outside. They have to be able to assess the evidence and the credibility of witnesses based on only what they hear in the courtroom. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Is there anyone here who's like, I have something in the back of my head that's going to color the way I hear someone's testimony, or that could shift the way I hear someone's testimony? No. Okay. Because that's part of being fair to both sides. And Ms. Blake talked about it, the court talked about it. Fairness to both sides. We're all fundamentally fair people by and large, right? It just means sometimes there are circumstances that means this isn't the case for you. And that situation, judging the credibility of a person that you have heard of or information that you might know, if that could in any way tip the scales one way or another, we've got plenty of jurors. You just be honest and tell us, okay? Because it's too important to Ms. Vallow Daybell and too important to the state that for you not to do that. Does that make sense? Okay. Turning towards my next area. Now the court is going to give you an instruction on what we have to prove. The court is not going to tell us how we have to prove it. And I want to chat with Juror 756 about this. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Ma'am, sometimes people who have ideas or maybe have watched CSI or have heard about things on the news will come in with an expectation of what type of evidence you want to hear. Is there anything about your experience, and did I see correctly you're a librarian?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about your experience and maybe something you've heard, and we're not getting into the details, but that would cause you to say, I'm looking to see this type of evidence?
No, I don't watch CSI.
Okay.
I watch some British things, but I don't know. So no.
Right. Right. And you understand that when you're looking at a case, you have to judge the evidence and to see whether the state has met its burden of proof on those elements without coming in with an expectation about what you're going to hear.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about the things that you've heard or your employment that would cause you to go, I want the state to give me a particular type of evidence?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Librarians are very open-minded, usually, generally.
And they like their details, right?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
And so the question is there anything about that experience that is going to cause you to go, well, if the state doesn't give me a certain type of thing that I'm curious about or I'd like to hear, then I can't consider convicting even if they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt?
No, I haven't considered anything like that.
Okay. Thank you. Now, let me flip to Juror 876. Yes, sir. I heard your previous answers to Ms. Blake, and I just want to follow up a little bit on that and ask you a question in terms of some evidence that you may consider in this case. Okay? In a case where the charge is conspiracy, it is often the situation where you will hear about actions taken by one or more members of a group. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And that sometimes information will come to you about sort of the outcome of what that group planned or did. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then the jurors are given a jury instruction that will say that if you act as part of the group, that you're responsible for the actions of the whole group. Okay?
Okay.
Even if, say, they're not the person who pulled the trigger, they're not the person who actually caused the person's heart to stop. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I heard some healthy skepticism of the news media. So is there anything about that factual scenario that I put forward that would cause you concerns about considering convicting somebody who was part of and acted as part of a conspiracy, but may not have been the one who caused the death?
No.
Okay. You understand that the court's going to give you an instruction to follow, and if that instruction included that you can be guilty, you know, the driver of the getaway car can be guilty of the bank robbery even if they didn't go into the bank. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Some of that information can sometimes be wrong out in the media on that issue. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And if you've heard something from the media or heard something from a news source that's different on that issue than what Judge Boyce explained to you, are you going to be able to put aside anything you heard from the press or from, you know, any other source and follow the instruction of the court?
Yeah.
Okay. Juror 756 again. Yeah. You have children, right? Okay. And I know your children may not be young anymore, but I'm going to ask you some questions about it. And let's say you had the cookie jar in the kitchen, okay? And you walked into the kitchen. You had told them all to stay out of the cookies, right? You walked into the kitchen, and one of your kids is standing there with chocolate on their lips, crumbs on their face, crumbs on their shirt, and the jar is open. And you look at them and say, "Why'd you eat that cookie?" Right? Yeah. And they go, "I didn't do it." Are you firmly convinced that they ate that cookie?
They may not have been the culprit who stole the cookie.
But did they eat? Does the evidence say they ate the cookie?
There's evidence there that says they did.
Yeah.
But,
so are you going to hold them accountable for eating the cookie?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. And so that sort of stuff, the crumbs on the face, the chocolate on the lips, is what they call circumstantial evidence. And so in criminal cases, so I give that analogy because it's simple and it doesn't involve a crime, unless the cookie was really valuable. And so because I want people to begin to understand, there's been a lot of people who've heard about the idea of circumstantial evidence. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I bring that analogy up to make sure that we understand and can talk about your ability to evaluate a case based on circumstantial evidence. Mm-hmm. And so a criminal case based on must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt as to every element. But the court doesn't say how we have to do it. Does that make sense? And so a case, if a juror is firmly convinced of all parts of the crime based on the circumstantial evidence given, the jurors must convict. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I know you had I heard a little bit of hesitation on, well, maybe they may not have been the one who took the cookie, but do you understand the concept of, holding your child accountable because they ate the cookie and you told them not to?
Oh, absolutely. I just don't see it as a huge crime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you got to be careful in here, and I try to be. And so, but when we take that and sort of extrapolate to the larger circumstance, is there anything about the charge of murder and conspiracy that causes you pause and makes you think that unless they show me a certain type of evidence, or if they only give me circumstances, but I believe all those circumstances, and I believe those circumstances meet the definition beyond a reasonable doubt, are you going to be able to consider convicting somebody based on circumstantial evidence?
Yes.
Okay. What about you, Juror 776? I didn't know if it was tired, but I thought I saw a little hesitation. But
no, I fully, I should say my philosophy is the crumbs on the face for the cookie extrapolated up is the same theory to me.
Okay.
To me, it's the facts are the facts, no matter big or small. It's still the same process throughout. So.
Okay. Is there anything?
Like the cookie, though.
Is there anything about that conversation that gives you pause about your ability to hold the state to its burden?
No, not at all.
Okay. Juror 929. Sir, hi. Good morning. Good afternoon. You can tell I've been here all day. Turning towards looking at, you've been a previous juror, correct?
I have.
Okay. Are you going to be able to judge this case and evaluate the evidence based on the instructions that Judge Boyce gives you?
Yes.
Is there anything about that experience that's going to cause you to compare and contrast the experiences?
No, in the sense that in both cases that I was involved in, we had to get clarification on one case multiple times on a couple of instructions just to make sure that it was understood.
Okay.
But I don't see any trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you the foreperson?
In the second case, yes.
Okay. And so taking that experience and understanding that you really have to assure the court that you're going to judge the case and evaluate the law given in this courtroom, mm-hmm. You're going to be able to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, turning towards that, there will be times evidence on some murder cases is given to you about how someone died. And a lot of times jurors expect to hear that. Does that make sense?
It does.
Right. In some situations, there may be evidence where the experts will tell the jury, we know someone caused this person's death, therefore the experts believe and are asking you to find it to be a homicide, but they can't exactly tell you how the person died. Mm. Okay, I see you nodding.
Yep.
And if the court gives you an instruction that gives you the parts of the crime of murder and says you have to prove the person caused it, the person contributed to or was a part of the death, okay, and you believed that the person was responsible for the death, but the state didn't show you how they died, could you consider convicting?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about that that gives you hesitation or pause?
No.
Because I think, this would be your third jury service in Ada County. I don't know if they have a punch card, but okay. I had that conversation with juror 929. Is there anyone else who heard that conversation and went, "Whoa, Miss Smith, that's a little out there"? Can everyone assure us that you can consider convicting if the state proves it beyond a reasonable doubt, even if we can't show you evidence you might like to hear? I see nods. Is there anybody with hesitation? Okay. All right. Let me pull my questionnaires and go through a couple specifics. Juror 1039. Okay, yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I see you have a son?
I do.
Okay. That son is a high schooler?
Yes.
Okay. One of the victims in this case is around the same age, slightly older, but around the same age. Okay? Is there anything about that would cause you to not be able to sit and consider evidence and give Ms. Vallow Daybell a fair trial?
Not that I can think of at the moment.
Okay. Is there anything, and I don't want to dwell and repeat the judge or Ms. Blake's question, but I do want to ask you about it specifically. Normal human reaction to autopsy pictures is normal. The question is, will seeing images of a teen or cause because of the age of your child, cause your emotions to overwhelm your reason and common sense such that you can't consider the elements and hold the state to its burden?
I don't think so. Echoing some of the other jurors, I'm sure I would find it unsettling, but I would like to think that I'm logical and can consider it as part of the whole group of evidence.
Okay. Is there anybody else who heard that conversation? Because none of this is easy. Nobody really wants to do that. The question is something in your background going to make it so that you can't do it? Right. And I see everybody shaking their heads. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. One moment. I'm going to check my team. I think I'm done, Judge. One moment. Your Honor, there may be some things we would like to take up of a more sensitive nature later, but with the court's indulgence, we can do that later.
All right, we'll do that in individual voir dire on those sensitive subjects. Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to commence with defense voir dire, you may do so.
Good afternoon. I just have some follow-up questions. A lot of my questions have already been asked. Based upon your jury questionnaires that you filled out last week, I do have some questions. Juror 745. You indicate you may have a hardship if you have to sit here for 2 months due to your schedule and children and handling an estate for your father. Are those hardships still present today?
They still exist, but I think I can work out getting rides for my kids and things like that.
Okay. So between last week when you filled out your questionnaire and today, you've resolved a lot of your potential hardships with your family or?
I think I can work it out.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Juror 755. You work here at the courthouse.
I do.
So you know a lot of the people.
I do.
Is that good or bad?
Not sure if it's good or bad. But
Well, I've been here a week, and I kind of like the place.
it's a great place to work.
Yes. So knowing the clerks and bailiffs and witnesses, some of the witnesses, does that cause you any concern about your ability to be fair and impartial throughout this trial?
Well, as indicated in my questionnaire, I don't actually know the witness. I just know of him.
Okay.
I do work with the coroner's office as well. In fact, every department in Ada County I work with. So, but no, I don't think it would influence my decision at all.
You're an auditor.
I am.
Do you wander the halls of the courthouse, or are you just stuck in a room somewhere?
Limited to the first floor mostly.
Okay. If you vote not guilty, is anyone else in the courthouse going to harass you for that vote?
I don't believe so, no.
They just believe that you did your job, you did your duty.
Exactly.
You don't feel any pressures about your work by being a juror in this case?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Archibald, I'll just engage in another follow-up question or two on that topic with Juror 755. In the course of your work, do you cross paths with or run across any of the staff here working this case? Have you seen me in the courthouse? Have you seen the defendant anywhere in the courthouse or the lawyers since this case started up last week?
I have.
Okay, that was just my follow-up question. Thank you, Mr. Archibald.
Juror 756. In your questionnaire that you filled out last week, you indicated you may have a trip planned for the first week of May. Is that still the case?
Yes.
So if you were called upon to be a juror for 2 months, would that throw a wrench into your trip plans?
Yes, we'd have to cancel and reschedule.
And so is your trip a non-refundable trip?
No, it's miles and then it's a lot of miles and points.
But that's booked and ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And where are you going?
Mexico.
Okay. Your Honor, this may be a hardship for Juror 756 to serve here a potential 2 months. So I'm going to challenge this juror for hardship so that she can go on her trip.
All right. I'd like to hear a response on that from the state.
Your Honor, if we could ask some follow-up questions.
Yes, you can ask additional voir dire.
Juror 756, are you willing and able to reschedule that trip if called to serve jury duty?
Yes.
Do you feel that it's such a hardship, or would it cause you concern that you would be able to sit and hear the evidence and render a fair and impartial verdict if you had to cancel that trip or change it?
No.
The state doesn't have any further questions, but we'd object to a strike for cause.
All right. At this point, the court's considered the question as it relates to hardship. While that may certainly be an inconvenience and disappointing to miss out on such a trip, if that were to occur, I don't find that it would rise to the level of excusing service at this time based on the jurors' responses. So Juror 756's challenge is overruled at this point.
Juror 894. In your juror questionnaire, you indicated that you have a daughter who has frequent doctor appointments, that you need to work and take care of her. Does that hardship still apply today?
No, my parents are already set up to help us take her to and from appointments as needed.
Okay. So since you filled out your questionnaire last week and today, you've resolved your potential hardship?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Juror 1051. You indicated a potential hardship with family. You work for the city of Boise, and does that hardship still apply today?
Potentially, I don't know. This is my own ignorance on this. Reading through one of the questions, I didn't know being separated, if there was times where you weren't able to go home. As long as I'm able to go home every weekend, I don't see that being an issue. If there's times to where we're isolated away from that, having an infant at home, I think that would be challenging for my wife and for me.
Okay. So the hardship with your job with the city of Boise, you've resolved that. You're still a little bit worried about how much you can go home during the trial?
That's my own ignorance on that.
Okay. So if you're allowed to, if we have evidence portion of the trial where you can go home every day at 3:30, is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
And then when we're all done with the evidence, then the jury is sequestered. Some juries reach a decision in an hour. Some juries reach a decision in a week. But it's during that time that you cannot go home. If you cannot make a decision overnight, then you stay, and the county puts you up in a hotel. Do you understand that now?
Yes, and that's totally acceptable. That was my own ignorance on reading through that part.
Okay. So with the trial portion, you're being allowed to go home, and the verdict portion, you're together as a jury until you make a decision. Do you believe that a hardship still applies?
No.
Okay. Thank you. So the judge and the prosecutor have talked to you about burden of proof and presumption of innocence. And the judge will give you some written instructions so you can read them and study them. But for now, we're just talking about those and asking you some questions. Juror 755. If it were put to a vote right now, if you were one of the jurors, and it put to a vote, is the defendant guilty right now or not guilty?
Your Honor, the state's going to object to that question. That's proper for voir dire.
I'll sustain that objection to that particular question, Mr. Archibald. I think you can question regarding the standard of burden of proof, but I'll sustain the objection.
So presumption of innocence, what does that mean to you?
Well, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
And there's been no proof so far, right?
There's been no proof or evidence.
So if you were to vote, you'd have to vote not guilty right now.
If I hadn't seen any evidence, right.
Right. That sounded like a trick question, but it wasn't a trick question. So because you've heard no evidence, so you have to vote not guilty.
Right.
Right. So in some nations, you're presumed guilty instead of innocent. Are you okay with our law that presumes people innocent until proven guilty?
I am.
Okay. Juror 894. Sounds like you've had some experiences living in other countries where the media tells you one thing and then the other media tells you the other thing. Is that right?
I mean, I think every country has that.
Yeah. And have you lived in those countries where you're presumed guilty and not innocent?
Yes.
And are you okay with our system here where we presume people innocent until proven otherwise?
Yes, I am.
So if you had to vote right now, would you vote innocent?
Well, there's been no evidence, so yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Your Honor, I have questions about exposure to pretrial publicity. We should probably take those up one at a time.
Very well. All right, at this time, that will conclude then the individual voir dire of the attorneys with the entire panel here. What we'll do next is take up individual discussions as it relates to pretrial media publicity and other sensitive matters that jurors may wish to discuss outside the public presence. So we will remain on the record but close the simulcast portion of this proceeding in order to more fully go into those topics in dealing with these individual jurors. So we'll start off with the remaining jurors, lowest number up to the highest. So we can go on to juror 745 if you're okay to go right now without a break, or if you want to take a break and come back, I'll allow that also, or you're going to get a break when you're done. Okay, let's all rise for the jury then, and everyone can be excused except for 745. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, for juror 745, there, as you saw, are a lot of people that have been made aware of this case before they came in to report for jury service. So we want to be able to discuss your knowledge of that and whether or not that has created some possible bias, and do so outside of the presence of the other jurors so they don't hear things they shouldn't have heard through that questioning. So I've reviewed the responses in your questionnaire. Let me start off with a couple of general questions about what you would know about the case or what you've seen in the media. Have you, besides news reporting, seen any movies or dramatizations or documentaries about this case on either Netflix or Lifetime or 2020, 48 Hours, anything like that?
There was, I think there was at least one, I don't know if it was 2020 or a Dateline episode that I watched.
And do you recall how long ago that was?
I don't recall exactly.
When would you say the last time is you read something or went out and sought, have you sought things out or just read them as they've popped up in your news feeds?
I've just mostly popped them, or when they've come up in my news feed. When I did get the original jury summons, my first thought was this case, and so I was looking up when this trial would start, and then I thought, oh, I missed it by a week, and then I saw an article that I realized that the date of jury selection coincided with the date that I was starting my jury service, and so I thought I realized at that time there was maybe the possibility that I would be a part of this.
Okay, I appreciate your responses there. I'll allow the state to conduct any additional individual voir dire for juror 745 and then move on to the defense.
Juror 4-5, I think both in your questionnaire and today you mentioned that you had seen either a Dateline or a 2020 special on this case. Do you recall approximately when that was?
I just don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Just asking you what you remember. You also indicated that you do follow some headlines and you do read some articles.
Mm-hmm.
I think specifically you talked about seeing some kind of a newscast of bodies being found on Chad Daybell's property.
Correct.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall any other specific articles or headlines that you've seen?
Not specific details, no.
Does anything about that Dateline or the 2020 or the article about the bodies being found cause you concern that you could sit fair and impartially on this jury?
No.
Are they, from what you recall from those, are those things that you could set aside knowing that those aren't evidence and not consider those?
Yes.
And from anything you've seen, is there anything that you would expect to see in the state present as evidence that if was not presented, you would cause you concern or affect your ability to be fair and impartial?
No.
I don't have anything further.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Before I move on to the defense, I did have another question for Juror 745. Before reporting last week to get the questionnaire, were you aware of or did you know what the defendant was charged with either here in Idaho or anywhere else?
I think in one of the articles I briefly saw maybe the list, but I wasn't that familiar with all the details.
Okay, thank you for that response. Mr. Archibald or Mr. Thomas, if you'd like to inquire, you may.
There's been a number of media stories about this case, and you, and only you, know how much of it has impacted you. If you had a judge on your case, because you've been in court a lot from what your questionnaire said, right?
Correct.
And you want your judge to be fair and impartial when handling the estate for your father, right?
Correct.
So as you're going to be a judge in the case against Lori Vallow Daybell, are you comfortable with the media that you've been exposed to? Are you comfortable with you being a fair and impartial judge for her?
Yes.
And why is that?
I think maybe based on my prior court experience, I just realized how important it is to see all the evidence. You can't just base your opinions on your own personal bias or opinions or until you're actually like in the court proceeding and you're going through everything. That's when you're actually see all the evidence. You can't necessarily trust that one person's reporting that they've seen all the sides to it. And I know a lot of things aren't necessarily released to the public or kept confidential, even though when you see a news report, it sort of feels like, oh, this is all the information there is. But I understand that that's not really the case.
Okay. And so just as you want the judge in your case to be fair and impartial, you understand why my client would want the same for her.
Yes.
And these this media has it ever presented my client in a good light?
Probably not.
Yeah. So you can understand my concern that if someone has been exposed and saturated with media, it's usually bad stuff, right?
Yes.
So do you believe that in your state of mind, you will be requiring Lori, my client, or me to prove her innocence to you?
as mentioned before, I think it's just, for court here, we're assumed innocent till proven guilty. So that's where I am today.
Okay. So if you were sitting in that hot seat now, or your best friend was, where Lori is sitting, would you be comfortable with the juror in your state of mind?
Judge, the state is going to object here. I think that's an improper line of questioning. We've kind of let it go, but at this point, we're going to object.
I'll let Mr. Archibald just finish this question, and then we'll see if we need to move on from there. You can complete the question, Mr. Archibald.
It's not an improper question. Go ahead.
Could you repeat the question?
If you were sitting in the hot seat where Lori Vallow Daybell is sitting right now, would you be comfortable with the juror in your state of mind judging her for the next 2 months?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Counsel, I think that concludes then the court's inquiry and counsel's inquiry into this juror. Does either side propose a challenge at this point from the state?
Your Honor, the state has no challenge.
All right, from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, juror 745 is passed for cause at this point then. You'll return to the jury room. We'll bring in more jurors for this same process, and we'll let you know once we've completed the group. Thank you. Let's next have juror 755 brought in, please. All right, juror 755, you're brought in for individual questioning just because you do have some information or knowledge about this case. A few questions I'll just have for you. Can you explain what sources of information you've received anything about the case from? In other words, what news, if you remember it was, any documentaries or shows or movies or anything, books?
Well, I was limited to KTVB news articles on Facebook and social media. That's the only place I've seen it.
All right. Before I indicated what the charges were in this case when you got your questionnaire last week and then again today, did you have any knowledge of what the defendant was charged with here or in any other jurisdiction in anything?
Yes, I did, but do I need to specify which of them?
You can do that. What's the knowledge you have of that?
That she was allegedly indicted on the murder of her children, but that was limited to the articles on Facebook.
Okay. That's, I believe, the questions I had as related to the media issue. The state, if you'd like to conduct any individual voir dire at this time of juror 755, you can do that.
So, if I'm correct, you said that you had seen a little bit about this case. Do you remember any specific details that you've reviewed or heard prior to coming in for potential to be a juror other than what she was accused of here in Idaho?
I do not.
Is there anything about what you had seen or heard regarding that there was an indictment for death involving the deaths or murder involving the deaths of her children. Is there anything about what you've seen or heard before coming in here? I guess it was really last week, but before coming in last week that would cause you concern about your ability to set that aside and just listen to the evidence?
No, I don't think there's anything that would prevent me from doing that. Once I had seen the first article, I just kind of ignored the rest that came through, and that's something I wanted to read upon.
And anything about your knowledge or what you've seen or heard that would cause you concern that you could sit and be a fair and impartial juror in this case?
No, there's not.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald?
So, Juror 755, when you talk about the media on social media, what are you talking about?
Specifically, I'm speaking about news articles that were published by local media.
Okay.
On Facebook.
So Facebook is the social media that you're talking about?
That's correct.
And on social media, you get news downloads from who? What news sources are you talking about?
KTVB. That's really it. That's all I follow. I don't have cable or TV. I stream everything, so that's what I'm limited to.
So did you watch anything like on Netflix about this case?
I have not.
On Dateline about this case?
No.
2020?
No.
48 Hours?
No.
Were any of those programs summarized in your social media that you got?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. There's been books and movies about this case, not exposed to those either?
I am not.
So because of what you have been exposed to, did that put my client in a good light or a bad light?
I believe the articles were painting it in a bad light, but yeah.
So because these articles are painting her in a bad light, does that mean you're still presuming her innocent, or are you presuming her guilty and wait to see if she proves her innocence?
Presuming innocence, I would wait for the article to come out after the case is over to make a determination on how I felt.
So you're acknowledging that even though this media has continually said bad things about my client, you're not going to hold that against her?
No.
So in your state of mind that you're in now, are you comfortable judging her and presuming her innocent?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. That'll conclude our questioning at this time for Juror 755. The court didn't see any or hear a challenge for cause of that juror, so if you'll return back with the bailiff to the jury room, we'll give you further instructions here shortly. The next juror we'll have brought in, please, is Juror 756. All right, thank you, Juror 756. You're recalled here for additional questioning outside the presence of the other jurors to inquire about any specific information you may have about this case, and also if there's any other topics that counsel felt should have been discussed outside of the presence of the others. You made reference in your questionnaire that you have some knowledge of this case through news media. Is the information you listed in your questionnaire still accurate about the type of media you've heard in this case?
Yes.
Okay. At this point, counsel, I think on this one I'll just defer to counsel for any additional questioning they may have on this proposed jurors' questions from the state.
I'm just pulling up your questionnaire so I make sure that I'm looking at it correctly. It looks like you had answered regarding what you'd heard about the defendant or Miss Vallow Daybell, is that she was accused of killing her children.
Yes.
Did you have any other knowledge or information about Miss Vallow Daybell?
No, I really haven't followed it. I'm not a social media person at all. So whatever, if it comes on KTVB or CNN or something quickly, and I really haven't paid much attention. So.
And I think you had acknowledged that you knew she was in a relationship with another defendant, her husband, I think.
Yes.
Anything about knowing those things or the articles or headlines or where you may have gotten that information that you feel would affect your ability to sit and only give weight to the evidence and the weight that you think the evidence deserves?
No.
Anything about hearing or reading any of that that you think would weigh into your decision?
I really haven't read much. I mean, you can't help but hear things, but so no, I don't have any in-depth information.
So anything about the limited knowledge or limited things you've seen that would cause you concern about your ability to sit on the jury and be a fair and impartial juror?
No.
Any concerns about only considering and weighing the evidence presented during a trial?
No.
I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to inquire, you may.
This media that you read, was it in a newspaper? Was it on your phone?
No, I was probably really, I watched the news. Basically, it was probably watching the news.
Okay. Did you ever talk to someone else about that news?
No. Well, my husband, maybe. Just, look what happened, that kind of thing.
Okay. And did you watch any of the other TV specials about this
No.
this case? Dateline?
Nope.
2020?
Nope.
Netflix?
No. No.
48 Hours?
No.
There's a lot of books and movies and specials about this case.
Nope.
Yeah, just the news.
No, it really isn't something, it's not generally what interests me, so.
Yeah. And you're a librarian?
Yeah.
You read for a living?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we don't read as much as I think we do, but we do read some. Yeah.
Okay. And what you've seen or read about, does it generally paint my client in a good light or bad light?
I would think if you're accused of murdering your children, it wouldn't be a great light, right?
Yeah. And so I'm justified in worrying about jurors who have been exposed to media. Should I be worried about you?
No, I really haven't. I have not been exposed to that. I do not like social media. I've never liked it. I find it, I think it's destructive to people. So it's not. Yeah. So I haven't done that whole thing at all.
And I tried to help you out to go on your trip, and you turned me down.
We'll still go. We'll go whenever.
Okay. All right. So you don't really want to be on this case, do you?
I don't know that anyone in their right mind would really want to be on this case. No, I really don't think so. But you don't know me, and you don't know that I have a real sense of right and wrong and real sense of duty. Let's put it that way, duty. And if this is my duty, that's what I do. It's not about me.
That's right. So thank you for that. And so we appreciate jurors who come here and take time out of their lives to help us settle a case, because we obviously haven't been able to settle it yet. So, with your state of mind, do you have any concern about your ability, with the news that you've been exposed to? Are you concerned about your ability at all to presume my client innocent?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Then the court hearing no challenge for cause on this juror. Ma'am, we'll have you return back to the jury room while we talk to the other jurors, and then we'll let you know for further instructions. We'll have juror 776 come in next. All right, welcome back, juror 776. We're conducting some individual questioning for jurors, and there are several that have some prior information or knowledge about this case, so we can talk about that openly here without others hearing what you may or may not know about the case. The court has reviewed your questionnaire, and it does indicate some detail of knowledge here. Let me first ask a question. In terms of what this defendant's been charged with in this case or anywhere else, before I advised you of the charges in this case when you came in to get your questionnaire last week, had you heard what she was charged with at all?
I don't feel that I had heard exactly what they were, but I knew that there was charges brought against, but I don't recall knowing the details of what they were.
Okay, and did you know where charges may have been filed, including Idaho or anywhere else?
No.
Okay. Have you watched any of the Beyond Local News documentaries or specials or movies or anything about this case?
No.
Okay. That would conclude the court's questioning as it relates to the media issue in this case. The state can inquire if you want to question this juror relating to either the social or any of the media exposure, as well as any other issues you think were more appropriate outside the presence of other jurors.
Your Honor, may we approach briefly the court and with defense counsel?
Yeah.
That like white noise.
All right, the court had a sidebar there with counsel off the record, and at this point, we'll suspend further questioning for juror 776, and if we have additional questioning, we'll let you know, but you can go ahead and return back to the jury room with the other jurors, and we'll have you come back in for further instructions here shortly. So let's next bring in juror number 876. Counsel, while they're coming in also, I'll just briefly indicate that the juror who wouldn't sign the affidavit because they said they didn't follow the instructions was juror 781. They were dismissed on a hardship question, so that is the issue that came up on that, and I won't address it any further unless counsel wishes to, but that was juror 781. All right, welcome back, juror 876. We had some additional questions as relating to responses in your questionnaire about some exposure to this case through media. The first question I'll have is, before coming in to get your questionnaire and then again today, were you aware specifically of what the defendant was charged with either here or anywhere else?
I was aware that it was a murder trial. That's basically it.
Okay, no further detail beyond that in terms of what you already knew?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, if the state would like to conduct any additional voir dire with this jury, you may do so at this time.
Your Honor, the state doesn't have any questions for this juror.
All right, for juror 876, does the defense have some questions, Mr. Archibald?
Juror 876, do you recall filling out your questionnaire last week?
I do.
And you made a comment in there that it's suspect where her kids were found. Do you recall writing that?
I do.
Where would you get that information?
I became known in the trial from the beginning where the children have gone missing, and then up to the point. I think I've only read about 2 articles. Up to the point where the kids were eventually found. I don't particularly remember where they were found. I just know that they were found.
Okay. And so the media that you were exposed to was what?
It was a news article.
Did you watch the Dateline special?
I did not.
The Netflix?
I did not.
The 2020?
No.
The 48 hours?
No.
So the media that you've been exposed to was just, was it in the newspaper or you read it on your phone?
It was on my phone. I was scrolling through Facebook, and I follow KTVB Channel 7.
Okay. And so based upon that, that's where you gained information about this case?
That is correct.
And did it paint my client in a good light or a bad light?
I can't say either way.
Okay. So you don't have any bias against her now?
I do not.
Based upon this one article, you haven't presumed that she's guilty rather than presuming she's innocent?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, that will conclude the individual voir dire of Juror 876 then. Thank you for coming back in. I'll have you escorted back to the jury room, and we'll give you more instructions here shortly. We'll next move to Juror 894. All right, welcome back, Juror 894. At this stage of the proceedings, we'll just have some individual questions for you because you indicated some knowledge of this case from the news or other media. Not much is indicated in your questionnaire. Looking back over what you put in the questionnaire, do you think those are still accurate answers about the level of knowledge you would have about the case?
Yeah, I know hardly anything, but I remember seeing like little snippets on Facebook, but I didn't live here at the time that the crime was committed, or I had just moved here, so I didn't even really know what it was about. So I didn't pay very much attention to what was happening at the time, honestly. I had too much going on moving here.
Okay. Before I stated what the charges in the case are, both last week when you got your questionnaire and this week, before that time, were you aware at all of what the defendant had been charged with here or anywhere else?
I knew that it was a murder case, but I didn't know the details of who was killed or the relationship between them, except for in like a super vague kind of, I don't really know how to explain it. Like I kind of knew in the background, but I didn't even recognize her name when you said it.
Okay, I appreciate your responses there. Those are the court's questions. Does the state have questions for Juror 894?
Juror 894, I think you put in the questionnaire and then you've expressed again today that you know very little about this case.
Yeah, that's correct.
From what you have seen or heard before coming in last week for jury duty, does anything about that information cause you concern with your ability to be able to set that aside and only consider the evidence presented in a trial in this matter?
No, I think I can do that.
Does anything about what you've been exposed to or heard or read cause you concerns that you could not be fair and impartial in a trial in this matter?
No.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. I'll ask the defense now if they have any voir dire questioning for this juror individually. Okay, thank you for coming back in then. We'll have you brought back in here in a moment when we finish the last ones and give you further instructions. And the court will indicate on the record there was no challenge presented by either side. Let's next go to Juror 929. All right, welcome back, juror number 929. We've brought you in for some individual voir dire questioning, either as it relates to potential media exposure in the case or other topics that the parties would wish to bring up outside the presence of the other jurors. The questionnaire you've filled out, and we appreciate you putting your responses in there, indicates you do have some knowledge of the case. Let me start off by asking you, since you've had time to think about it, since answering your questionnaire Is there anything else you think you should supplement on that or change based on what you know about this case?
No.
Okay. Before I read the charges last week during the part where we handed out the questionnaires and again today, were you aware of what the defendant had been charged with here or in any other place?
Very little, not completely.
Okay. What is it that you had heard about what the charges were?
I did hear that that the defendant was charged with the murder of the 2 children, and that was about it.
Okay. At this time, I'll pass for voir dire questioning to the state. Any questions you have, that concludes the court's questions.
Juror 929, I think, again, on the questionnaire and then today, again, you've indicated that you've had very limited exposure, heard very little about this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I think on the questionnaire you had indicated you heard about the case initially, but you don't watch the news.
Right.
And also the things you knew about Ms. Vallow Daybell was that she was married to Chad, LDS, and accused of murder.
That's correct.
And you also indicated the first time you heard the victims' names were of the reading of the indictment by the judge.
That's right.
Is that all correct?
That's correct.
So with hearing about the case initially and then the part about what you knew about the defendant, does anything about that, knowing that information, cause you concern about your ability to sit and listen to the evidence and only consider the evidence presented at a trial in this matter?
No.
Does anything about that information or what you've seen or heard cause you concerns about your ability to be a fair and impartial juror in a trial of this matter?
No.
I have no further questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, any questions from the defense on this juror individually?
Juror 929, there's been a lot of media exposure about this case. Where do you get your news information?
I mostly subscribe to financial and sports, and sometimes some food websites, and that's about it. Okay. We don't have TV in our house. We stream, and I've kind of cut down what I see because I don't have time to read everything. So,
okay,
yeah.
For the streaming news about this case, there's been Netflix. Did you see the Netflix?
We don't have Netflix.
How about Dateline or 2020?
Don't watch those shows.
And so there's been books and movies about this case.
None of that.
Okay. And so what you've heard has just come up on your social media like a Facebook?
I don't even have social media. That's how backwards I am. Don't have time.
And you're a financial planner.
I am.
And so the information that you would have learned about this case would have come from where?
Well, probably from an Apple news feed or something of that nature. I think I initially saw there were missing children, and that's probably first couple articles I think were about that. And then I stopped following.
Okay. And are you comfortable in your state of mind sitting as a juror on this case?
I am.
You've sat on 2 other juries, and in that experience, the defendant has to start out with a clean slate.
Mm-hmm.
Based upon what you know already from news media, are you comfortable that you can start out with Lori Vallow Daybell with a clean slate?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were asked to judge her, what you've learned previously won't play into that?
No.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. At this point, then, that'll conclude the individual voir dire of Juror 929, and the court's heard no motion or challenge on the record as it relates to this juror. So we'll bring you back in here just pretty quickly once we finish the last two and give you further instructions. Juror 1039. All right, Juror 1039, thank you for returning. This is the time we're going to discuss individually with you any information you may have about previous knowledge of this case from media sources. You've identified those in your questionnaire, so we want to talk to you about those outside the presence of other jurors.
Okay.
Let me first ask you, before I read the charges filed in this case both last week and today, did you know what the defendant had been charged with here or anywhere else?
Not specific charges. I think I had a general idea.
Okay. And in looking at, you talk about other news sources. Beyond the news, did you watch any kind of specials, documentaries, programs, movies, or anything that focused on this case before you came here?
No, not any documentaries.
All right. The court will pass at this time its individual voir dire to the state and see if the state has any inquiry.
Hi. So on your questionnaire, just looking at that, I just want to go over a few things. It looks like you indicated that you have maybe seen some news programs on KTVB or other Idaho news sources.
That's correct.
Is that still correct? Have you watched anything else?
I have not.
It also looks like you indicate you don't know who Tammy is.
I didn't recognize that name.
And that Tylee and JJ were missing kids of Lori Vallow and or Chad Daybell.
That's what I understood.
And that they went missing in 2020 and they were found in southern Idaho.
That's what I remember. It may not be correct.
Do you recall any, and whether it's correct or not, do you recall anything else that you've heard or learned of this case?
I think I remember that Lori and Chad were, when they were arrested, they were found out of state. I thought in Hawaii, but not in Idaho.
And with that, with the information that you may have heard or you think might be accurate, is there anything about that that causes you concern that you would be unable to sit through a trial and only listen to and weigh the evidence presented during that trial?
No, I realize that I only have a small subset of the details and would like to hear more of it.
And anything about the details that you do have or that you think you have that would cause you concern that you wouldn't be able to set those aside if that's not what was presented as part of the evidence?
No, I'm open-minded.
I think you'd also indicated that the action seemed a little odd for a parent of missing children, but you hadn't formed a firm opinion. Is that still the case today?
From what I think I know or read, it did seem odd to me, especially being a mother, that parents of missing children were out of state when their children were missing.
Is there anything about thinking that or having those thoughts that would cause you concern that you could not sit and hear the evidence and set those thoughts aside and fairly weigh the evidence presented?
No, I could just set that aside and hear full evidence.
Anything about your previous exposure to this case that would cause you concern about your ability to sit as a juror in this matter and render a fair and impartial verdict?
Nothing I can think of.
I have nothing further.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to conduct individual voir dire, you may.
So the comment in your jury questionnaire, her actions were odd for a parent of missing kids. But what media were you relying on for that?
Probably a news article online.
Okay. Is that where you get your news?
Usually, yes.
All right. Did you watch any of the specials about this case?
No, I did not.
Did you watch Netflix or Dateline?
No. I didn't know that there were specials about them.
Okay, 48 Hours or 2020?
No.
And the news that comes to you, is it on your phone or on your TV?
Usually through my phone or a laptop.
And the laptop, so that's the internet news, or
Correct.
like from Google or Yahoo, or
Yeah, correct.
and so at some time you formed an opinion that she's not acting like a mother should act.
From the limited knowledge that I had, it seemed odd. But.
Yeah, and so is my client going to have to prove her innocence to you?
No, no. I realized that I didn't have all of the details, so
Yeah.
I know that there are large pieces missing.
And it's okay to be honest about your feelings. You filled out the questionnaire last week. That's all we're asking of you, is to be honest about that. And so my concern as her lawyer is having people on the jury that have already judged her, like, hey Mom, your kids are missing, why aren't you doing this, why are you doing that? Is that something that was going on in your mind?
Possibly.
Yeah. And so, and you're the one who knows what your state of mind is. So are you comfortable being a juror on this case with how you felt about this case?
Yeah, possibly. Yes, I am comfortable. And quite some time has passed. I haven't followed the case closely recently.
Yeah. Well, will my client have to prove her actions to you about when her kids were missing?
No, that is not her responsibility.
Yeah. So you acknowledge that my client doesn't have to prove anything during this trial.
Correct.
And so again, this is a tough question because you're the only one who knows right now. But are you able to presume my client innocent?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That'll conclude then the individual voir dire for juror 1039, and we will get back to you here just quickly. We've got one more person to talk to. The court finding no challenge made on the record to this juror. Juror 1051. right. Juror 1051, welcome back. We've been conducting some individual questioning for those that have had any prior knowledge or exposure of this case. You did make a reference to that in your questionnaire. You didn't have a lot to say about it, a little bit, enough for us to ask you an individual question here. Before I let the attorneys ask you questions, I'll just ask, prior to coming in and having me advise you of what the charges are in this case, both last week and today, did you know anything about what the defendant had been charged with, either here or in any other place?
In my answer, I was just trying to be as truthful as possible. I don't really know what I don't and do know. I've obviously heard the name, I've heard about it, but I hadn't really followed the case or anything like that. I know my wife was listening to a Dr. Phil podcast or something like that. I was off building the kids' play set, so I really wasn't paying any attention to it. So I don't really know that much about it, but I can't say I didn't know anything about it either.
Okay, well, I appreciate that information. That's helpful. You stated you heard things from TV. Have you watched any kind of documentaries, special programs, movies, dramatizations about the case, anything like that?
No, I don't really follow the news or anything like that.
Okay, that concludes the court's questioning for the juror. Does the state have any questions for juror 1051?
Juror 1051, I think you just indicated on your questionnaire, you'd indicated limited knowledge and that what knowledge you had would have come from the TV. Would that still be accurate?
Just over here in the background, yeah.
And so when you're talking about overhearing in the background, to the best of your recollection, was that the Dr. Phil that you referenced that your wife may have been listening to?
I think she was listening to that, yeah.
Some
off building a construction project, so I really wasn't paying much attention to it.
So you haven't yourself sat down and watched any news programs, sat down and read any news articles? Based on the limited knowledge you have or what you may have overheard, is there anything about that that causes you concern about your ability to sit as a juror in this case and only consider the evidence presented and give it the weight you feel it's due?
I don't believe so. I think the only thing is I heard the name. That's about my extent of my knowledge.
And anything about that that causes you any concern with your ability to sit as a juror and render a fair and impartial verdict in a trial in this matter?
No.
I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald from the defense, any individual voir dire for this juror?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you, juror 1051. That concludes your individual voir dire. We'll have you return to the jury room. And before the rest of the jurors are brought back in, I'm going to have a brief just discussion with counsel here about our schedule. We're behind, obviously. I think it was a little overly ambitious for me to think we could go through 4 of these groups today. By my count, I think we've done 2. Is that right? So we've got jurors that were scheduled to come in 2 this afternoon. I do think we need to get through one of those 2 remaining groups, and we need to make some adjustments to the schedule here. So I believe the presumption would be we'll move on to the 3rd group next and potentially allow that 4th group to be excused. Otherwise, we're going to go really late, and I don't think that's what we want to do. Let's do this. We'll bring these jurors in, complete this group. I'll briefly meet with administration and kind of see where we are, and then I'll come back on the record and talk to council about scheduling where we are with our next group coming up. So at this time, if we'll just have the rest of the jurors brought in, we'll get this group completed, and then we'll take things up from there.
Your Honor, may we start the simulcast?
Okay, yes, thank you. So of that group, I think it's just 776 that was going to be dismissed. Let me just consult with my staff attorney briefly. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, at this time, the court has completed the individual voir dire. If you'll give me just a moment, I'll confirm that we've got the simulcast back up and running.
Yes, Judge, it's up.
Okay, thank you. All right, counsel, the court understands that after concluding individual voir dire, let's see, juror 1013, we did not conduct individual voir dire, and then based on a challenge that was raised for cause, the court concluded that juror 776 would be excused, finding for cause based on individual voir dire in the questionnaire. So, as my records would indicate then, the jurors that would be remaining to be passed for cause at this time, I'll go through a list and confirm with the state and the defense, are jurors numbers 745, 755, 756, 776, 876, 894, 929, 1013, 1039, and 1051. Does that seem right with the state?
Your Honor, I think you included juror 776 and had previously indicated that juror would be dismissed for cause. Other than that, the state agrees.
All right, thanks for the correction, and I agree with that as to 776 based on that ruling I made when we started. With the exception of that correction, then, does the defense agree those are the remaining jurors at this point?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. With that clarified, then, I'll ask formally then, noting we're back on the record on the case, with that remaining group I just indicated, does the state pass that group for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and does the defense pass that group for cause as well?
Your Honor, I think just for the record, since there were challenges made throughout the week, that those challenges are still of the record. So I acknowledge that this is the group that we have today.
Okay. I think that's a fair point, Mr. Archibald, that there have been objections or challenges on certain jurors that have been overruled by the court. All of those are still preserved, and so perhaps that question ought to be modified as I ask it, but I do note that you have preserved challenges for certain jurors that were ruled by the judge to still be able to return for purposes of the peremptory challenges. So I'll note that on the record. All right. So with this remaining group then, juror 776, you'll be excused. And as I mentioned with the prior jurors, that any attempts to contact you that are unwanted by you, you can report those to the court, and please respect the fellow jurors in this process if you do choose to discuss your experience with anyone. For the remaining jurors here, you have been passed at this time for cause, or any objections were overruled by the court, so you will be returning. We'll continue to question additional groups such as yours until we reach the necessary number of jurors for the attorneys to exercise their peremptory challenges. You're going to be instructed to contact the jury commissioner. We'll give you a card with his contact information. He'll be providing you additional instruction regarding when you will again be required to return, when we'll assemble the final group of jurors for peremptory challenges. While you